Pasito tum tum, pasito tum tum, pasito tum tum, pasito tum tum.
Hello, this is Chef Willy, and welcome to part 2 of this miniseries, Deep in the Noir. In my last video I talked about the tone of Noir. Now I would like to discuss the shadows of black and white. As I mentioned, one of the best black and white movies of all time, and one of the best stylized neo-noirs of all time, just to make it a little more tricky.
For some, this might even be pointless to discuss, but essentially in Noir, black and white became a character of its own, not only to look fancy and artistic, but to reflect symbolically its dark, pessimistic tone of the world. It would consequently affect the characters living in it, how they think, how they respond. In most cases, the villains are the most affected by this negative environment. In fact, if it weren't for them, there wouldn't be any Noir. They are the ones that pull the story forward. They commit a crime, the hero is in chase after them, which is why I would like to focus on the main antagonists of these individual films and how these heavy shadows of Noir can leave an impact on these villains. So if you were hoping for an explanation of why Decker is a replicant, you're in the wrong video.
But before we get into them, let's get into the deep black and white shadows of Noir.
One of the arguments that is often debated is whether film noir is either a genre or a style. The book about the philosophy of film noir shares both opposite point of views. Those that don't see noir as a genre excuse it as not as comparable to the same level as western or gangster genres, since noir is mostly about a pessimistic tone and the black and white is just a style. If so, then why isn't Casablanca or Citizen Kane considered to be noirs as well, since they also have stylized black and white? While I can see a valid point with those two films, I find it nonsensical not to compare it to westerns. Those that defend it as a genre quote the definition of being determined by conventions of a narrative structure, characterization, theme, and visual design. Any kind of genre comes with its own consisting elements to distinguish it. So yeah, you can compare it to the western genre, because it follows a consistent tone, theme, and characterization. Noir films have been consistent with its first-person perspective, anti-hero, theme fatal, themes of dark pessimism, and the visual design of black and white. The reason that Citizen Kane and Casablanca aren't labeled as Noir is because while they look gorgeous in lighting, they're not consistent enough with the Noir genre. They're not underworld crime stories, and neither are they pessimistic enough to reflect the world as sad and depressing at the end.
As you may guess, I'm in the boat that believes it's a genre. But does it need to be black and white in order to be Noir?
Well, since the beginning, movies have had an option to use color. They just didn't use it because it was too complicated or expensive. But just like Noir, color has been used before, such as in Dial M for Murder or Les Samurai. The black and white look was mostly defined and perfected in the 20s by the German Expressionism. The shadows gave it a haunting atmosphere, the overexpressed faces left a bigger impression, and they also had a pessimistic tone.
If I could make an example, there's a difference of having a black and white that looks like this. Very standard, a lot of white in the background, nothing interesting to see. Even I don't look interesting to see. Until you have something like this. Based on one light, you have shadows that make the background more interesting, your face is more highlighted, and you can also play with the shadows to either make it more suspenseful or add a little mystery in your scene.
It wasn't until these directors were banned from working in Europe during Hitler's regime, either for being Jewish or not support the Nazi cause,
leading them to immigrate to America and bring that German Expressionism style, which was westernized to what is known as Noir films. Or is it Noir? Noir? How do you say it again?
Now, in the case of Noir during the 40s and 50s, it was most definitely necessary the use of heavy black and white. Because Noir stories were dark and mysterious. by removing our human visual side of color, made the film more intriguing but inhumane in its own world, which symbolically reflected its depressing tone with its heavy shadows and faded lighting. If you were to add that human element of visual color, then it doesn't feel as faithful to that dark realism of that era. Something that these classic films would go through with the controversial colorization during the 80s.
And I feel with the rise of social media and high definition, it has given us an appreciation to these black and white images, not as old forms, but as stylized and artistic. And also modern medias have shown that black and white can still work effectively, or pretty bad. But whether in color or black and white, can you equally use these shadows to tell a story?
One of the main similarities between The Third Man and Blade Runner is their worlds look astonishing. They both have gorgeous shadows, and even with Blade Runner, you can change the color to black and white and get some haunting noir pictures from it. At times it even looks like a modern take from the German expressionism of Metropolis. The details of these places become vivid characters of their own to depict their world as dark and isolated. The Third Man was filmed in Vienna as a post-war story that still felt the effects of the war, giving light that not only was America affected by the Second War, but everyone was affected by it. Having shot real-life buildings set in ruins because of the war really testified the characterization of Vienna in the story, once gorgeous but left with paranoia and brooding shadows of their hunting past. Blade Runner was shot with miniatures that doesn't even look like if it was made in the 80s, but they lowered its volume color to emphasize a pessimistic sense in it. It depicts a future ruled by commercialism, with the poor social class underneath the rich autocrats. While The Third Man interprets its own isolation with shadows and dodge angles to show how crooked this world is, Blade Runner reflects its own with fog, rain, and heavy shadows as well.
While the settings symbolically depict the hopelessness that humanity is feeling, what about someone that gets consumed by the darkness of this world and embodies it as a villain?
On one hand, these two might be opposite of each other, and on the other hand, they seem like the opposite side of a coin, jointed together, but with different ideologies. The two main villains are Harry Lim, played by Orson Welles, and Roy Batty, played by Roger Herr. They're the main central focus of the story. They're both sophisticated, intelligent, have a taste for the arts, and are being chased after by the hero. In The Third Man, a Pulp Fiction writer named Holly Martins goes to visit Harry in Vienna, only to discover that he's dead. Then he starts digging up for more details, and the case doesn't seem to add up. Then the twist reveals not only Harry alive, but as a villain working in the black market. In Blade Runner, Rick Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, is called out of retirement to hunt down 4 androids, Batty being their leader, who rebelled and escaped to find his creator so he can give them a longer lifespan since they're running out of time. They're both fascinating because they're so ambiguous and yet very complex on how they perceive life. Though I find Harry Lim to be the most interesting out of the two, since he has the least screen time and yet his encrypted motives say so much. We can assume he must have been a decent person before, as he's well spoken of by Holly Martins.
But the true mystery is, what led him to change? What made him fake his own death and choose a life of a criminal?
It's not made very clear enough. The only thing that's made clear is, he doesn't care about human life. He doesn't even find it worth saving. He doesn't even care whether his girlfriend dies or not.
You don't care anything at all about Anna, do you?
I've got quite a lot on my mind.
You wouldn't do anything.
What do you want me to do? Be
Get
reasonable.
somebody else.
But why?
Well, I think maybe Harry could have been affected by the war in Vienna. Maybe he saw how horrific and truly evil we are that in a moment of snap realized that maybe it's not worth living in this world. Even though he still considers himself as a religious man, he sounds like if there's something about his devotion that has been perverted.
I used to believe in God.
I still do believe in God, only. I believe in God and mercy and all that, but dead are happier dead.
Based on his beliefs, he tries to justify his path of crime, selling drugs, as an act of mercy to the people. Maybe he thinks he's doing a favor to humanity by killing them and freeing them out of this heinous world. On the other hand, in Blade Runner, Roy is not entirely evil in the end. He was subjected to slavery and programmed to live a short life. Anyone with that life could snap and become a monster. But we never see him kill or threat any innocent people. he only attacks those that have wronged him before or want to hurt him. He's not looking for revenge or world domination. He only wants life, to live and experience parts of the world that we disregard.
What seems to be the problem? Death.
Both of their speeches, which, coincidentally, not only were they improvised and the most famous lines of the movie, but they encapsulate their ideologies to identify who wants to do harm and who wants to leave everyone alone.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10-house gate.
In Batty's speech, we feel sorry after his death because he's so fascinated about life, and it breaks him just like us that he will never experience it again. If an oppressed android could see the beauty side of a cruel world, then maybe there is some good in it.
All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain.
It becomes a curiosity as to who is the true villain. Is it the one who created him, the one that is hunting him, or him because he's still different? In Harry's speech, he talks about how there can be no creativity without chaos, giving light how through generations most of the art has been inspired by tyranny.
In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace, and what did that produce? The cuckoo clock.
He almost insinuates that the only good thing that war will ever bring is art. Similar how Germany gave us revolutionized cinematography and Triumph of the Will. We can assume he wants to be an artist by imitating these tyrannical acts of murder and black market crimes, adding to his disregard for human life. And that's where you can compare Harry and Batty as two opposite sides of a coin. One finds life to be beautiful, the other finds it to be as crazy as the sound of a cuckoo clock. While one appreciates life, the other one hates it. And we can guess if Batty would have gotten what he wanted, he might have disappeared, not bother anyone, and go on living with his own life. While as for Harry, he would have still continued with his crimes, hurting others. As how he's fully represented dressed up in black, and fades in with the shadows, representing how he's one with the darkness. I could also go too far to say how Batty's white hair may represent his pure intentions in his mind, despite his menacing presence.
Now, some say that these stories are so ambiguous that they don't have any moral lessons. While they're not entirely wrong, there's a theme they both commonly share. These stories are about survival.
The survival of the mind, the survival of the body. How can you psychologically survive after being exposed to true ugliness of man and still remain hope? How can you survive a hyped up future that is made out for AI to be the next new species on the planet, when someday humanity might become the minority and live in fear of persecution, as how Batty felt? It is our survival instincts that searches for any humanity left inside of us. In a world where its inhabitants are not fully good or are fully bad, digs into if there's any humanity left on how the main leads are impacted by the villains. Holly is impacted negatively by Harry when he's disappointed that his big idol is a criminal. While as Deckard, a divorced man and retired physically and metaphorically from his emotions, is impacted positively by these androids who remind him what it's like to feel once again the emotions of love and fear. One shows that humanity is dead, and the other that there is still some hope. Almost making a perfect yin-yang for the Noirs. Those that spread the dark shadows, and also the ones that spread the white shadows of a building.
Time to die.
Thanks for watching part 2 of this mini-series. Now tune in next time for part 3 as I discuss the most dangerous person in Noir history, women, in Double Indemnity and Basic Instincts. Until then, as an old crazy man once said,
So long, Holly.